Oh, hell yeah.
This is Dubs OT.
Can't wait.
With John Dickinson.
Hey, JD, what you up to, sugar? Long time no talk to.
On KNBR 104.5 and 680. Streaming live at knbr.com and on the KNBR app.
San Antonio matching its largest lead of the game at 12 with 2.5 to play. Trying to stretch the win streak to 6. Be their second longest of the year. They had an 8-game win streak in December. Green, no switching home a three-pointer to stay within striking distance.
Yeah, striking distance, but missed opportunity for the Warriors tonight. Shorthanded, spirited effort through really the middle of the third quarter. They built a 16-point lead, and then it was all San Antonio from there. The Spurs flipped the switch on the shorthanded Dubs over the final 18-25. Warriors are plus 16 at that point. It winds up 56-27 in favor of San Antonio in the final 18-25 of gameplay. Big fourth quarter, big close to the third quarter to wind up allowing for the game to be tied going to the fourth, and San Antonio ultimately wins it by that final of 126-113. We're here at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City. It is Dubs OT with JD here on The Sports Leader as we have reached the All-Star break. Cheers to everyone out here at Harmonic as folks filing in here on this rainy and windy Wednesday evening as we hit the All-Star break, and the Warriors 29-26 at the All-Star break, and Golden State will be back in action next, coming up here a week from tomorrow as they will take on the Boston Celtics. Last two games before the break at home, Warriors split them with the stirring comeback on Monday. But again, San Antonio, a whole different animal. Second of the back-to-back, underestimating the Warriors' ability to compete with the talent that they had on the floor, whatever it was for the Spurs. I think the Warriors get credit for how they played for the first 2.5 quarters, but my goodness, we've seen through the heyday of the Warriors, them be able to flip the switch on some lesser talented teams over the years. And man, they got it done to them tonight because San Antonio flipped the switch and the defense got going. The Warriors defense was non-existent. Wemby was kind of doing his thing, and it just wound up being too much Victor Wembanyama, too much De'Aaron Fox, who ends up with 27 on a pretty efficient scoring night. And then the bench does the job. On a night where the Warrior bench had come out and initially played well, it was San Antonio's bench that winds up Keldon Johnson with 21, Harper, the youngster with 14, Harrison Barnes pitches in 10, balanced approach from San Antonio. And the Warriors wind up just wasting, I think, a night where they don't turn it over a lot, only 11 turnovers. There wasn't really a lot of defensive pressure for the most part either way. But as the game got tight in the third quarter and then down the stretch in the fourth quarter, the Warriors just no answer in terms of players with the ability to get into the paint and create for others. And Wemby was just an absolute force. I mean, any kind of half-hearted drive or sometimes even some of the full-throated drives were just turned away by Wemby. And you see him back there ready to pounce, and you dribble it back out or you kick it back out, and it was an ugly, ugly second half for Brandon Podziemski. Really, Podziemski started the game 4 for 4 and winds up on the evening 5 for 12, so 1 for his last, what does that make it, 8? And he had missed 7 shots in a row. The Warriors hit some threes tonight, 16 of 47, but really went cold in the stretch run there where San Antonio was able to flip the game and ultimately control it. So we're here for you for the next hour plus. We'll keep it going as late as they want to go tonight. We got Julia and Chris manning the shop here tonight at Harmonic in Thrive City. So as late as they want to keep this place open tonight is as late as we will go. But it is the All-Star break for everybody. Maybe a little shorter. We'll see how things shake out here throughout the course of the evening. But 808 KNBR, the number, if you want to jump in and join the conversation via the phone lines. 415-808-5627. Golden State Lumber and Showroom text line is open. And, of course, it is the best YouTube chat in sports. and folks filing into the YouTube chat. We certainly appreciate it. Couple of things to get to if you want to weigh in on the game itself. And, hey, how could the Warriors play so well to build that 16-point lead and then so poorly to get throttled by 29 from then on in? We can get into that. We, of course, are going to get into the Anthony Slater piece from ESPN, which dropped earlier today. We'll hear a little bit from Anthony Slater on some of the details involved in that piece. And basically it was the sources unloaded, as often is the case when a player that is more maligned than I think people think wind up exiting the organization. And I think we saw it, and I knew a lot of what was coming was coming. We've referenced a lot of what was talked about in Slater's piece on our shows here throughout the course of the season. And so we'll kind of run through coming up in the next segment here just what Slater had reported and kind of go through the chronological component. And I've said it a lot, people would push back on some of the things I would say and be like, JD, the Warrior players are standing up for him. And Steve Kerr says this in a press conference. And the Warrior players aren't saying that they think that he's a problem in the locker room or quit on the team or any of that. It happened. And anybody in the know knew it was happening. And people that want to deny it, I mean, the Warriors players were publicly being very nice. And that's typically what happens in situations like this until somebody's no longer with the organization. And then the tea is completely spilled. And so that the tea was spilled all over the coffee table and down on the carpet and maybe behind the couch and everywhere in the Warrior living room as it related to Jonathan Kuminga. So we'll parse through it, kind of our final, I think, installment of the Kuminga Chronicles here on Dubs OT as the Warriors, again, try to shift their way toward what's remaining on the schedule here between now and the end of the regular season. As they currently sit at 29 and 26 with what would that be 28 games to go on the season after the All-Star break. 808 KNBR 415-808-5627. We'll get to the YouTube chat if you want to jump in and join the conversation on the game first. We'll weigh in on that. I'll kind of give you my thoughts, and then we'll get into the Kuminga stuff, and then we will also get into some reasonable expectations for what's ahead for the Warriors, given the way that they've played in this stretch without Steph and without Jimmy Butler, and knowing that Kristaps Porzingis is going to be coming in and Steph likely will be able to return a week from tomorrow when the Warriors take on the Celtics. So let's get to the phone lines. Our tip-off caller tonight will be JT in Oakland up here on Dubs OT on the Sports Leader. Good evening to you, JT, and thank you for jumping in and joining the conversation tonight.
Appreciate it. Wow. The Warriors and the Giants are so much alike right now, where you have so many guys that you want to rely on, but you can't. You're just not sure where the whole vibe of the team is going in this direction. I'll tell you what, I don't want me to switch to the Giants, but I got to give Buster Posey credit. He's gone. They didn't have hitting. They got Rafael Devers, and they got the guy they got from the Padres. So they're going in the right direction. The Warriors, I don't know what the hell they're doing, man.
Well, I'll say this in comparison. The Giants don't have a Steph Curry, and that's the one thing that is the major difference. I think you're spot on. There are a lot of similarities, between the two. They're kind of stuck in the middle. The Giants think they have a bunch of young players on the come. We'll see Eldridge and others within their system, which has been boosted. The Warriors don't have the young. They don't have the next core and the next crop. Now they do still have Steph Curry, who is still single-handedly better than anybody the Giants have, and that's no disrespect to Devers. I mean we're talking about a whole other level. But, if you want to go down the comparison road as it relates to that, we can. The main difference is, to kind of bring it back to the Warriors have no young future core that you're even excited about getting to learn about. And on these nights where they wind up losing, it's pretty blatantly apparent that that's the case. And so I think that's where some of the frustrations of the way things have played out in terms of draft picks that they've made and players that didn't pan out, like Wiseman and Kuminga, who are now gone, and what they were able to net in return for those players has, it's not what you would hope to net in return for guys that were picked second and seventh specifically in the draft. So, I mean, we can do the comparison thing, but to kind of bring it back to the Warriors, it really is the lack of any real semblance of hope when it relates to a future, which is more to the point as to why I understand people's frustration with them not being more willing to go all in on the present to at least attempt to maximize the time that they have left with Steph Curry as an all-time great, maybe top 5 of all time, and future Hall of Famer.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. But to your point, it's like the Giants have no farming team, and we don't either. Same thing. I mean, really, right?
The Giants don't have a farm, you said?
No.
Yeah, no. It has been bare for years. The only difference is they have a next crop, basically next group that led by Eldridge that we haven't seen them be able to come up and how good they are at the major league level. We know that the last crop there isn't a lot there, and so a lot of those guys are gone. Your Lucianos and the like. So anyway, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Again, the Giants are on to the next group that might very well be good or not. We don't know. We'll find out in the next 2 to 3 years. But the Warriors don't have anybody currently that you're that excited about. And look, tonight, as well as Moses Moody's played of late, he didn't play well as the game went on tonight. And Podziemski started off all right tonight, but ended up awful. Ended up awful for the entirety. And so when the stakes get ramped up, 16 points for Podziemski, but he's a game worst minus 27. So I didn't really want to hear about the 16. For the nights where maybe Podziemski has not scored at that level but impacted winning. Podziemski was one of the worst players on the floor tonight, if not the worst player on the floor tonight for the Warriors as the game went on. And, as Mickey D points out, the young guys just aren't consistent. They aren't consistent, but they also lack a sufficient enough ceiling to where you can really believe in counting on them for the long-term future. And so I think that's also a part of the equation that has to be factored in there. So 808 KMBR 415-808-5627. As you listen to KMBR 104.5 and 680 San Francisco, the sports leader, a Cumulus media station, we get into the 10 o'clock hour here. It's Dubs OT with JD. Warriors lose as they get outscored 56-27 over the final 18-plus minutes. They lose 126-113. We're out here at Harmonic Brewing in Thrive City. Some thoughts on this one before we get to the YouTube chat, just kind of generally. Warriors were inspired tonight in this one. They jumped out to a 16-8 lead. The ball was moving. They were getting layups. They were getting threes. They were getting Wemby in some uncomfortable positions defensively. They were taking advantage of the in-between game. They had 0 turnovers in the first quarter on a night that wound up being a pretty good night for them overall. We mentioned with the 11 total turnovers, it's 38-31 Dubs into the first quarter. You're feeling pretty good about the way things are. Warriors able to knock down 5 threes in that first quarter. They'd hit 4 more in the second quarter, although the percentage started to plummet. Warriors pushed the lead up into double digits. They were scrappy. I mean, it was a scrappy Warrior group tonight, and it was really led by Draymond. And I thought you could make the case Draymond up for the challenge tonight against Wembanyama, and that kind of set the tone for everybody throughout the course of the evening. Warriors up 67-63 at the half. Moses Moody had 12. Podziemski had 12. GP2 was pitching in, making hustle plays, blocking shots. The Warriors shot 50% and were about 38% from 3 with 21 assists. So the ball movement was negating Wembanyama's impact on the game, and the Warriors were hitting open shots and getting into the right spots on the court to get good looks. given the way the Spurs were playing defensively. And look, the Spurs were not really challenging at that point in terms of the overall, defensive pressure and getting in passing lanes and really trying to run the Warriors into Wembanyama to where they'd kick it out, and then they kick it out and not really have anywhere to go. But you look up first half, and it was, quality Melton, quality Spencer, quality Pajemski in that first half with the 12 points. Moses Moody had the 12, was a +9. But in the second half, after the Warriors, you're thinking, all right, when is San Antonio going to look to flip the switch? But the Warriors were able to push the lead in the first half of the third all the way up to 16. It was 86-70. Pat Spencer with the lefty finish off the glass. But immediately after the Spurs called a timeout down by 16, they go on a 9-0 run. Steph was into the game at that point on the bench. Spurs cut it right down to 5, though. It ended up being an 11-0 run for San Antonio. But the Warriors able to hit a 3, and Quentin Post was the only guy that could hit a shot there for a short stretch. But after the spirited effort of those first 32 minutes, San Antonio woke up, and San Antonio closed the third on a 24-8 run to tie the game going to the fourth quarter. The competitiveness notable, but the lack of talent once San Antonio ultimately flipped the switch proved to be too much for Golden State, as it was 94-all going to the fourth. And in the fourth, the Warriors come up with just 19 points, 32-19 in the fourth, from a tie game to a 13-point San Antonio win. All right, let's keep it rolling with Mark in San Francisco next here on Dubs OT before we get to the YouTube chat. Hey, Mark.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
I got you loud and clear. What's on your mind tonight?
Okay, I had you on the radio. Kind of came in for a second. Thanks for taking my call. I want to bring up, feels like an elephant in the room kind of thing to me, although I think probably
sure
that's the thing with an elephant in the room. Everyone's thinking about it, but no one's fully saying it. But I want to give a little bit of just one fan, me, my feeling about the Warriors and when I think this went wrong and why we maybe missed the golden moment. The golden moment to me, right when Draymond punched his teammate in the face. That ever since then, I have never felt this. I've never felt the same about the Warriors. It revealed a lot of things. I thought how they handled it or didn't handle it, and sort of enabled him, and no one would really come out. And they got rid of, they kept him around. I was like, this team, the love we play with, love and joy was just gone for me right there. But it was also feeling like this team's never going to get near a championship again. And right then, I remember calling in, and that's I'm going to say it because in sports talk, that's the currency. I called it, but I did. I called, and I was like, I know this sounds crazy, but trade Steph Curry right now. You could get so many picks and even probably a great player or two. You could get so much. Get rid of Draymond Green. Now is the time to rebuild. I knew they would never do it because they're going to still put butts in the seats with Steph Curry and this delusional idea. But I feel like everyone knows we're not getting a championship with Steph Curry. I feel like we all know it. And back then I was like, we're just going to watch the farewell tour of him slowly wind down, and there'll be some cool moments. And it's depressing basketball to watch. And I have not enjoyed watching the Warriors hardly at all since then. And that's the moment right there that I can pinpoint. So my question to you right now is,
that's not a crazy thought. I'm gonna jump in and I'll let you finish. But I it's not a crazy thought of the moment that it flipped. I don't think you're alone in the moment that it flipped, because the vibes were maybe at an all-time high if you go back to when that occurred, which was in October of 22. So they're 4 months removed from winning the title, and then that happens in training camp or in the preseason, and it did completely set the entire that year off course. Obviously, they did end up getting to the second round, but then the next year they get knocked out in the play-in. They've been searching for, a secondary player ever since. They ship Poole off. It's like you're not crazy for the initial part, but I'll let you finish.
Okay, well, that's good to hear, because I felt it and just something shifted, and it's never been the same. But my question now is, and this is what I want to get, because I was trying to gauge this. So right then, I feel like, as far as the trade, because you never would have traded Steph Curry before then. His stock was that was the highest it was ever going to be, because he was still like, people would have given a lot, I think. I Are we now already at the bottom? I don't think so. We're close. We're maybe 50, 60% less than it would have been if they traded him back then. But it's still not the bottom. Why not trade him now?
Yeah.
When some people still might be into it. What do you think? Is that just crazy talk? Because I see no other way. They have to fully rebuild, like for real. Get some picks, get something going. Let's just accept it.
Yeah.
It's done.
Well, they haven't been able to make quality picks when they had top picks. They were fortunate. They got the one in the Wiggins deal that turned into Kuminga. They got they had the year where they were the worst team in the NBA, and they got the second pick. So their lottery ball hit, not first but second, and they whiffed on the picks. And so I don't really have full trust that this front office would be able to draft at a level to where they could get the thing back on track. But to your point, I more believe in you have a once in a lifetime player, so you try to do what you can while you can to maximize that. And if you can't win a title, you can still compete in the playoffs and as the Warriors have said, and Steph has said himself, play meaningful basketball. I personally would rather see 2 to 3 more years of try to get into this, second round of the playoffs, as opposed to a full teardown to the studs right now. Now that day is coming. That being said, that day is coming, but I'm not quite to that point yet. It's funny though, because again, you're not alone in that, Mark. It's not where I would go, but you're not alone in that thought. I think, especially from some of the more seasoned Warrior fans that maybe didn't think they would ever see another title in their lifetime, let alone 4.
Well, so yeah, I hear what you're saying to the meaningful basketball. And if it was a business decision, they're probably thinking like that too. Like, we got to get people here to see the game, because if we go through a few years of just terrible basketball, no one's going to come. So
he's still good enough though, Mark. I think Steph is still good. If Steph had declined a little bit, more than he has to this point, I think it might be a different conversation, but he's still so good. I think there's a value in trying to do it for him. But I'll give you the last word, but we got to be quick. I want to keep things rolling here.
Well, it's the other question. How do you get enough around him? And I guess that's what we're trying to figure out. How do you get enough around him to do that? I can't see a path. So, what's that?
Well,
that's my question back to you.
It's something. And thanks for the call. The question, and it's contradictory to what your play would be, which is you would trade draft capital. You trade some future draft capital to try to get somebody in that can help now, and you hope somebody like Porzingis hits, and you hope you keep Melton, and you hope Jimmy Butler comes back. But you've got one more move that you would have to make in addition to that. And if all those things hit, then maybe you can be back in that mode where you're, a second round kind of a team that can be competitive and give a team hell in the playoffs. I put our guy Gene up on the screen as we were talking to Mark there, because that's not happening. But it's crazy, Kyle, as we bring in the great Kyle Haar in the Daly City studios. I mean, we get one a show, I feel like, lately, that's like, yeah, just tear it down. It's okay. Steph's still too good for that, for me.
No, I agree with your point in that Steph hasn't shown a great decline in his play. Like, he's still someone that can carry a team to a championship run, I believe. But yeah, it's kind of maybe tying this whole Kuminga thing and the front office together is, well, one, they've whiffed on picks, and two, they haven't been willing to trade future assets and young players to better the team.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really well said. 808 KMBR 415-808-5627. Dubs OT with JD here on this Wednesday night on the Sports Leader 808 KMBR. Let's get to the YouTube chat. Off and firing here on this Wednesday night. Max Lopez filling a roster with 18-year-olds while Steph was still in his prime would have been a failure, even if they were decent picks. Look, you get Franz Wagner and Trey Murphy or Sengun, and I think we're having a different conversation. The irony is those players, you pick Halliburton, you trade back and get Wendell Carter and draft Halliburton, and skip on Wiseman, and I think we're having a completely different conversation. I'm not saying Halliburton would have turned into the player he turned into with Indiana, but the guys that I'm mentioning, Halliburton, when I look at Wagner, when I look at Sengun, when I look at Trey Murphy, you know what's interesting about all of those guys? All of those guys, Max, were considered safe. All of those guys were considered low upside, safe picks, low risk, low reward, high floor, low ceiling. And Halliburton ends up being one of the stars of the game, leading a team to the finals as a young player. Sengun is awesome. Trey Murphy is turning into a sharpshooting Paul George with this Pelicans team. And so I think when you look at it, the safe picks would have actually been the picks that could have realistically turned into a two-time line, because if you're telling me you got Hallie and Wagner and Sengun or Murphy, I mean, this team's a title contender right now. And you have young players that could be tradable, where you could put together a better package for somebody like, I don't know, maybe a Giannis that might get Milwaukee to take your offer. Or you're in a position where you're already so good that maybe you don't want to make a move. I mean, you're telling me, and again, I understand all the different reasons why that didn't happen, but the reality is, and it's a nice segue as we move forward here into the Anthony Slater piece, because I think, in addition to all the individual things about Kuminga and his behavior and quitting on the team and, all that stuff, to me, the biggest takeaway is we knew all that. We knew Kuminga was questionable in terms of believing, what the type of player he thought he was versus what Kerr wanted him to be versus, believing he was. We knew all the stuff about JK that was in that piece already. The stuff that to me was the most important component to it all was the front office stuff. To me, it was more about people, the questioning of the front office and the questioning of the front office to the ownership group. Like, to me, that's the more, not to put it all on Joe Lacob, but the indecisiveness and again, not letting the basketball people make the basketball decisions is one of the key quotes in the piece that we'll get into said. That to me is the most, that's the stuff that's the most revealing among all of it. So I don't want to sit here and say, they Hallie and you get Halliburton, you get Wagner, you get all these guys, but the Warriors took flyers on projects, younger players, because they thought those guys had more upside. And the reality is the guys that were considered the more safe picks wound up being the players that have developed into better players. So sometimes just make the right pick or let the basketball people make the picks, I think is important. All right, let's run through a few more here. 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627. No cap. Caller wants it both ways. Doesn't want to invest post picks in his era while he's here, and he doesn't want to trade him either because Chase Center would be, like it was the last two games, empty. Joe wants it both ways. I think that is right. I think Joe wants to win. I don't think anybody should question Joe Lacob's desire to win. It's just the way that you go about looking to do it. You have to. It's like Bruce Arians, right? Back in the day, no risk it, no biscuit. And so you have to take some form of a risk. And that's the one thing about Porzingis. There's almost no risk in Porzingis. He comes in, he might help, he might not. If he doesn't, his salary comes off the books. They get their financial house, and there's no risk. They traded a guy who wasn't playing a lot for a guy that hasn't been playing a lot. Jimmy Butler was low risk because they gave up Andrew Wiggins in one pick. That ended up being 20 or something in the 19, 20. So at some point you can't have it both ways, and you do have to go Bruce Arians, no risk it, no biscuit. And you got to risk it to get the biscuit. And this summer is really, in a lot of ways, their absolute last chance. You could say 2 years ago with Siakam and Anunoby, and they wound up getting Jimmy, but they don't, they get Porzingis, and we'll see how it works out, but they have to, even if Porzingis hits, as I've said a lot, even if you keep Melton, even if Jimmy's coming back, you're still one piece away. You're one move away in the offseason from really building a team that has the ability to be like a top 8 team in the NBA at that point. Again, no guarantee of a championship, but I think that's where you get back into that. You're ahead of a lot of these other teams that currently you're even with or behind. But again, it's on them to be able to make that move at that particular point. All right, let's do a couple more here. Chats, Chris Cash. Imagine if Lacob and Bob Myers didn't miss Okongwu, Draymond, Franz, Murphy, Steph. That's a championship team right now. 100%. I mean, that's absolutely well said. You could throw Şengün in there as well. Although I guess if you take Franz and Murphy, you don't have Şengün, but you could have got Okongwu in the other draft as a potential trade back, even if you didn't get somebody like Halliburton. And again, they didn't go in on Halliburton because they didn't think he was a high ceiling player. And they had Jordan Poole, who hadn't turned into anything at that point, but did. And they had Klay Thompson coming back at some point, and Klay did come back and ultimately, along with Jordan Poole, helped them win a championship. So I do think it's fair that you have to point that out. Like, why were they less inclined to go Halliburton and Wendell Carter in what would have been a trade back that was, reportedly on the table at that point? Well, because they had Klay coming back and they had Poole, and Klay and Poole did help them win a title in 2022. Good one, though, from the 707 and Chris Cash. They're so indecisive since Jerry and Bob left. Joke's on you, writes. This team needs solid role players, not superstars. They already have that. I do think if the role players were on point with Steph and Jimmy and Porzingis at this stage is a role player, I'd be with you. But I think they think, especially without Jimmy, they have to get a second star now in there. And they've just been paralyzed at the inability to acquire that player at the expense of giving up some of the capital that they have to look to move to get somebody that's, not a Giannis, but is also a player that can help at the Jimmy Butler or maybe even slightly below Jimmy Butler level, if you want to say, somebody like potentially a Jaren Jackson Jr. All right, let's get a couple of more here in the YouTube chat. Best YouTube chat in sports. It seems like the Warriors fall apart in the third quarter for the past few games. Yeah, I think San Antonio, part of it was San Antonio got down 16 and they said, we got to wake up or we're going to get beat. Like right now. We got to wake up and make a run right now or we're going to get beat by this group. And I think San Antonio, they played in LA last night. They had it in cruise control. They blew the Lakers out. I think the Spurs came in and it was a little bit of last game before the break, and they were thinking they could come into Chase and coast because of their significant talent advantage. And the Warriors took it to them. They put it on them. They were aggressive. They were competitive. They were feisty. They were fearless. And San Antonio kind of sleptwalked through the thinking that they were just going to coast to the win. Then they got down 16 and they said, we gotta play. And when they played, they hit the Warriors in the mouth. And at that point, when they hit the Warriors in the mouth, the Warriors didn't have enough to respond. And it winds up being 56-27 and night for Golden State. And they're headed to the break here now, 3 games over the 500 mark with the next week off. 2 more here in the YouTube chat. We're doing a lengthy start here. I hate how Pods will just stand at the 3-point line like he's going to hit a monster 3 like he's Steph instead of moving around. Too much caught in between. And too much inconsistency from Pods in terms of just taking the open shot. Just, you get the ball kicked out to you, take the open shot like you think you're going to make it. He gets caught in between. He doesn't feel totally confident, and then he holds it. And then he puts it on the deck. And then he gets stopped, and then he dribbles it back out, and then he holds it. And then he kicks it to somebody, and it's a grenade. And then Moses Moody, it's not a great look for him. So he tries to drive. He can't get anywhere. He steps back and he airballs a corner three. Or he kicks it back to Pods, and Pods airballs an open three. The airballs. It was a pretty brutal set. Final of the 18 minutes where the Warriors got clobbered. It was a pretty brutal. It was the worst of the worst from Pods and Moody. It was the worst of the worst from two guys who at times are maligned for their inability to level up. I think both have played better of late, but man, when the Warriors lose these games, you very clearly see why. When they don't have the primary guys able to step in and be able to lead the way to the finish line. One more here in the YouTube chat, Mr. E-Painter, 3681. Think of your personal all-time top five. Curry is on your list. Ask yourself, would anyone else on your list let themselves be punked by management for years like Steph has? Wow. I mean, MJ, no. LeBron, no. I mean, who else is in your top five? Your top five all time. I don't know about Wilt. I don't know about that. That
Kareem?
crew. Bill Russell, Kareem. Yeah. I mean, Magic, Bird. Magic got. Way back in the day. Way back in the day. Magic did get his first coach fired, and then Pat Riley was installed. So no, that's interesting. I have a hard time putting it on Steph, but maybe Steph's been a little too nice in all of this thing. I think that's a fair point. You know what, Kyle? Let's do two more. We're going to do two more. I'm making the executive decision here. Juju Bug 34. Personnel determines everything. Without Jimmy, the Warriors would have to elevate Pods, and when he thinks it's on his time, you won't find a more frustrating player. Yeah, and I think, taking Pods out of the starting lineup, that was something that I advocated for after he hadn't played well, but they still need him. And, the Spurs really got into dare guys to shoot mode tonight. They were daring Draymond to shoot from three. They were daring Peyton after he had hit one to shoot from three. And just they were shooting and they weren't hitting. And then it does become more on the others to be able, a lot of Melton trying to create, and he did the best he could. A lot of Pajemski trying to create, he couldn't. And that's the one thing that we know. I think we know, and I was open-minded the other night, and I am open-minded over the final 27, 28 games to see if, with a lot of these young players, they get an opportunity to have to do a little bit more. Does somebody step up? We've seen Guy Santos inspired here in this 2-week stretch since Jimmy's gone down with more responsibility. But really it's Pajemski and Moody, and maybe to a lesser extent Guy. But can Pajemski and Moody with more run make that small jump between now and the end of the season that so many have been hoping that they could make, that they have both in their own way, and Moody less frustratingly than Pods, but both in their own way have been unable to meet. I think that's what you have to look at here. And tonight is one of those games against a really good team in the Western Conference that the answer to that question is a resounding no. All right, let's get one more. We'll go real quick, rapid fire, and then we'll take our first time out. Lengthy opening segment. Otis Bird, just like the Niners, winning without the main guys only lasts for so long. Hopefully Steph and Porzingis can play next Thursday, the Warriors' next game. I think that's well said. I said the same thing to our buddy Austin Scott tonight. I said, hey, they've been competitive. I thought they had to get it up to 18, I said. 18 or 20. I think that might have been enough. The way it played out, it wouldn't have been enough to hold on. But I thought they had to get it up to 18 to 20. They only got it up to 16 before the Spurs flipped the switch. But, yes, this group is only going to be able to remain as competitive as they have been for so long. And I think the shelf life, I'm looking at my watch, I think it was February 11th. I think the expiration date on this group's ability to compete at a relatively high level is Feb 11, 2026. So, yes, they need to get Steph back. They need to get Porzingis in the fold. They need to let some of the guys that have some minor bumps and bruises be able to get rested up here over the course of the next week and gear up for a stretch run, because I think how competitive this team is going to be will be fully determined on Steph and Porzingis' ability to play down the stretch of the season. All right, let's take a timeout. 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627. More from the YouTube chat. We'll come back and we'll review some of the top headlines and what was a juicy piece that I think we all knew was coming from Anthony Slater of ESPN. That is coming up next right here. It's Dubs OT with JD on the Sports Leader.
live from downtown.
Hurry, way downtown. Bang! Bang!
This is Dubs OT with John Dickinson on the Sports Leader. Streaming live at KNBR.com and on the KNBR app.
But Wemby's working and Santos can't get it.
He did have Green wrapped up there, could have called a foul. And that left arm as Green gets a steal. A chance here for Golden State. Big possession, down 9. Green hit a 3 a moment ago. Nice cut, Pajemski. Green, you know, is going to find him. That's 8 assists for Green, and it's a 7-point game.
All right, welcome back. Warriors lose 126-113 as they wind up dropping this one by 13. They led by 16 middle of the third quarter, but too much San Antonio down the stretch to prevail in this one as the Warriors hit the All-Star break 29-26. Next game a week from tomorrow as the Warriors will host the Boston Celtics coming out of the All-Star break. And we'll see, hopefully, a Steph Curry return at that point, hopefully a Kristaps Porzingis debut for the Warriors on that night, because the schedule is going to get a little bit more difficult coming out of the break with Boston and Denver, the first two in to Chase Center in the immediate aftermath of this coming week off. All right, 808 KNBR, 415-808-5627 to jump in and join the conversation. We'll get back into the YouTube chat here momentarily, as it is Dubs OT with John Dickinson. We're out at Harmonic in Thrive City. Cheers to, again, a spirited crowd out here in Thrive City and at Harmonic Brewing following the Warriors' loss. Let's get into the Anthony Slater piece. And so before we do that, or as a means to do that, let's go ahead and play this clip from earlier today on ESPN. This was Anthony Slater summarizing, and I would encourage anyone who hasn't read it to find it on social media or just go to ESPN and check it out. Lengthy piece, a lot of detail on the final fractures of the Warriors relationship, and a lot of good detail on the Steve Kerr-Kuminga relationship specifically in this first half or 2/3 of year number 5 for Kuminga. But let's get to Slater in his own words here before we get into some key components. And I'll throw it out to the chat, the Golden State Lumber and Showroom text line as well. If you read it, give me the most damning thing or the most important thing. Like, what was the most important takeaway in your mind from the Slater piece? And we'll also hear Slater kind of summarizing it right here.
Yeah, the internet today obviously globbed onto that one detail I had within there about
detail?
One of his one of his friends, taking too much food in the Warriors in a tense meeting with Steve Kerr on December 10th in his office. One of the things that he was kind of dinging Kuminga about, and it was just an example of the toxicity of where this relationship got to. Petty was the term many people used, and it had deteriorated to this point over 5 years because what I tried to lay out was two reasons. Number one, the coach and player just had completely misaligned views of where he was going. Jonathan Kuminga wants to be, an advantage creator, a guy with the ball in his hands. Steve Kerr over the last few years has made it clear he wants him to be more in the Andre Iguodala role. He's mentioned Sean Marion, Aaron Gordon, those type of players. But the real misalignment that goes back to the beginning is a front office, led by Joe Lacob, who really, was central to the drafting of Jonathan Kuminga, who just failed to move off Kuminga at various times, despite knowing the coach, the Hall of Fame coach that they were going to keep in with the system and the roster, wasn't going to fit with the player who had different views of his career. And it kind of led to the moment where, look, we spent all summer talking about it. We're still talking about it to this point. And it dragged on way too long. And that became very clear.
All right, so that a good summary from the man himself who wrote it. Again, this whole thing started, and we talked about it a lot. I've said it for years, going back to my prior radio life. The number one disconnect between Kuminga and Steve Kerr was the player that Kuminga 3-4 years ago believed that he was versus the player that Steve Kerr wanted him to be to earn his time on the floor. And again, Sean Marion, it's not like Kerr was comparing him to scrubs. Sean Marion, Aaron Gordon, and Kuminga wanted to be more of the Kobe, Kawhi, Paul George, ball dominant, look to KD, look to set up your own off the dribble in the mid range, get to the basket, volume attempts at shots, like somebody that should be a featured focal point in an isolation based offense. And I think there could have been more give and take on that in particular. Had Kuminga shown any willingness to want to buy in to what Steve Kerr believed that Kuminga would be best suited at, in an attempt to just get him on the court and try to help this team as a role player. It all needed to start with Kuminga accepting the fact that for year 2, year 3, year 4, he was a role player, and his pathway to eventual stardom was going to be carving out a specific role. And as I've said over and over and over, he completely refused. He completely refused it. And so you kind of, start to get into some of the stuff as far as the pettiness, and Slater writes about this meeting in December where after the 1-for-10 game in Cleveland, he didn't play in Chicago. The Warriors ended up getting a couple of wins there, and then they had 4 days off in between that game in Chicago and the next home game. And basically at the next practice before that game, after a couple of days off, Kuminga was called in by Kerr, and it was a back and forth that got extremely heated, but between the two, with, as Slater writes, and I'll quote, exasperation boiling over. The discussion went from small picture to bigger picture. Frustrations let out on both sides, Kerr voicing his displeasure with Kuminga's lack of buy-in and competitiveness toward the team goals, and Kuminga letting out his hurt about Kerr's longtime lack of belief in him as a player. The meeting ended, Slater writes, with Kerr slamming his whiteboard in frustration. Kuminga, incidentally, then went out and delivered what Kerr would later describe as two of the most passionate practices he'd seen from him, running the floor, attacking the paint, defending with force. Kerr said, and this was a quote, "He did the things I asked him to do. I do feel for him that he's been sort of at the whim of my decision-making." So that, though, a brief indicator of what was a long-time issue. I think, Kuminga wanted some leeway, in essence, to be motivated, and that just doesn't work. And so, some of the more, I think, damning things, though, in this piece, as you start to run through it, is the role of Joe Lacob in this, and him bonding, as Slater writes, with Kuminga before he was even drafted, going back to the summer of 2021 and that draft in which Kuminga was taken with that extra pick that the Warriors acquired in the Andrew Wiggins trade. And it was sort of the cloak of Lacob, despite the fact that it's one thing to make a pick that you shouldn't have made, but to double down, triple down, quadruple down, quintuple down, continue over and over and over to not accept, as the Warrior veteran players led by Steph Curry are telling you that, one, they need help, and two, the younger players that are in the mix are not able to help in the ways you need them to be successful. Move off of it. It doesn't work. Kuminga didn't buy into Kerr. Kerr, in turn, didn't buy into Kuminga. And this was something that I think you could tell 3 years ago. I was doing shows talking about this 3 years ago. I was getting into arguments with nitwits on YouTube channels 3 years ago because there was this thought that Kuminga deserved all this leash to be able to go out and play the way he wanted to play, and that the Warriors would ultimately be better for it. Well, Steve Kerr wasn't about losing games that were going to prevent this team from missing the playoffs or losing a playoff series. And I go back to the Sacramento series in 2023. Jonathan Kuminga was the worst player on the Warriors team in that series. He was god-awful in that series. And if Steve Kerr had kept playing him for the duration at the level in which a lot of fans at that point wanted him to play, they would have lost to the Kings. He ripped them out. He went to Moses Moody over Kuminga, actually, wound up winning that series, and thanks to Steph and Kevon Looney and all of that. But I think that was actually, to me, that was the moment where it was cooked. That, to me, was the moment where it was cooked. We had a caller that said, when was it cooked between the Warriors and Draymond? This thing was cooked with Kuminga, I think, in the Sacramento series when he was the worst player on the floor in the first two games, game 2 in particular. Kerr ripped him out, gave him a little run after Draymond got suspended, but basically went away from him game 4, game 5, game 6. And then you've got Steph having to tell Kuminga to get his ass motivated to get on the bus to head to Sacramento. And if you're not buying with the program, don't get on. And that was directed straight up at Kuminga and Jordan Poole. And so to me, it was cooked then. Okay, you're not going to maybe trade him at that point because it's still 2 years in. But when he had the leak that he'd lost faith in Kerr at the end of 23, December, beginning of 24, January, that's when you should have cut bait. That's when you should have cut bait, because the perception of him having a lot of value is somebody that still had 2 years on his contract and still was considered a moderately high prospect. You would have been able at that point to, maybe he could have been in a Siakam deal or an OG Anunoby deal with a pick or two. And you wouldn't have been giving up everything. And you probably still could have wound up with Jimmy Butler in addition to that. When you look at what ultimately Jimmy Butler was able to be acquired for. So to me, we get into how things eventually fractured to the point of no return, but I want to go back to 23, because to me this thing was fractured beyond no return 3 years ago on the calendar. I think this was fractured to that point. All right, let's get Reggie and Vallejo. We'll sneak them in here, and then we'll get to more of the stuff from Anthony Slater as we kind of run through the piece here on Dubs OT. What's up, Reggie?
Hey, what's up, JD? I hope you're having a good night, bro.
I'm good, man.
Yeah,
I'm good.
I just,
very much so.
Yeah. It's funny, man. You kind of like been, I guess, just telling all of us like the writing that's been on the wall for so long. And look, it's just funny how it came into fruition and all these reports coming out about JK, and just the fact that he just was never bought in. And the thing that I wanted to call about tonight was just Draymond actually dropped a podcast. I think it was like a month or two ago. And one of the key highlights of his podcast was the story of how he got drafted to the Warriors and how he got his starting position over David Lee. I thought that was super interesting and key, because I think he was kind of hinting at JK at the time, because he was like, hey, I got drafted here and I had to work my butt off to the point where I had to outplay David Lee to take that starting role. And the fact that Jonathan Kuminga kind of came in with the expectation of, I'm going to come in here because I have all this talent. I have, all these raw skills, and I'm a 7th round draft pick. Let me tell you something. Steve Kerr didn't give one damn about how much skill you got. He always valued players that had experience. You're talking about Jeremy Lamb playing over Jonathan Kuminga, for crying out loud, right? I mean, it's just hilarious to me. He came in with the mindset, and the worst part is his agent was giving him all this negative energy, like, hey, Jonathan Kuminga deserves to be a starter. He's like a Kobe Bryant-esque dude. No, he's not. He was never bought in. And that's the funniest part about also Joe Lacob with being super let me hold on to this guy as long as I can because he's going to be the future. He doesn't want to defend anybody. He just wants to dribble the ball.
No, he wants, and look,
Sorry.
and no, you're good, and I'm going to let you finish. I jumped in on you there, but it also Kuminga believed that he'd shown enough, and Slater wrote this. I'm quoting Slater's writing here. Kuminga believed that he'd shown enough in lesser roles to earn more consistent trust and on-ball opportunity. Again, it's not about trust. It's about kind of change the system because I'm that good without truly proving, to your point, that you are that good. And look, I think a lot of this could have been avoided if Kuminga had been accepting of the way that Steve wanted him to play. And I think if he had earned the trust by doing it that way, I think based on injury and based on the fact that it's a long season, I think Kerr would have had his trust and then known that there's more that Kuminga wanted to do. And I think in instances where the Warriors were shorthanded, he would have been naturally given more opportunities to do it. And I think his development at that point would have been more steady because he would have already had this basic set of skills, things that he did well, dive to the basket, get his offense off of the playmaking, cut, get it in transition, defend, those kinds of things, but hustle and play defense and rebound and do all those things. Play like a guy who's going to get 5 dunks a game because he runs faster than everybody else down the floor to that spot where people are going to double and Draymond's going to hit him for a dunk or Steph's going to hit him for a layup. And so, but there was never that buy-in. And that to me, I think is on Kuminga. We can debate his overall talent.
Yeah.
Because I do think he's talented. I've never not said he's talented. Like, he is talented, but that initial buy-in to me is on the player, not on the coach. And we look back on it now, and there was never that buy-in because, as Slater writes, Kuminga believes that he can become a multi-time All-Star. And I think to go back to Lacob, I think, undermines Steve Kerr's ability to coach him because I think Lacob treated Kuminga like somebody that he believed was right to feel that the hard work a la Draymond Green was beneath him, Reggie. And so he thought that was, I don't have to do that stuff because I got the owner in my back pocket and I'm loaded with talent and they should be turning me loose. It should be me with Steph as the 1-2 punch, not anybody else that the Warriors had over the last couple of years. And I think it just reached a point where it was never going to be fixed. And in hindsight, they could have traded him for better players than Porzingis at this stage of his career. But the unwillingness to pivot, I think, is the most damning thing, Reggie. But go ahead, man. Finish your point.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, Jay, I've been following you since your, previous radio life. And it's just hilarious that we've come to this point where it's like the writing's been on the wall and you've been kind of telling us the storm's coming and it's here. And he's gone now, right? But the funniest thing to me, too, is like the way that Steph started. Do you think he was a starter as soon as he got – Don Nelson was playing AC Law over him. Come on. You think Jonathan Kuminga is going to come in here and start over guys that had actual college experience? No. And the funny, like go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say the greatest tell. I mean, you mentioned Draymond. Steph Curry and Jonathan Kuminga were the same pick in the draft. Think about that for a second. Steph Curry was the same pick that Jonathan Kuminga was, number 7 overall, but went about it and had to go about it a completely different way. And look at Steph.
Yeah, and Jay, I remember a game to the day. I think it was against the Utah Jazz back in like when Steph was drafted. Don Nelson closed with AC Law. And it's hilarious because why? He had more experience than Steph. Steph was turning the ball over a bunch of times. But back to your other point about just like the buy-in and opportunities, who are we seeing that now with? Guy Santos. If you put a Guy Santos motor in somebody like Jonathan Kuminga, then we're having a conversation around, hey, you're going to be the future because you got the motor, my guy. Like that's the thing. He had a low motor. His expectation was, give me the ball and I'm going to cook. You got Steph and Jimmy Butler. You ain't cooking, bro. You're cooked. Like, come on, man.
No,
But,
no
Jay,
doubt. No
I'm
doubt.
taking too much time.
No. Thanks, Reggie.
But, I appreciate it, Jay.
Appreciate it,
Have
man.
a good one.
Yeah, have a good night. Reggie checking in. I mean, Austin Scott said it tonight to me, Kyle. He looked up at one point during the game, and he gave me Guy Santos' line, and I one point I'll just give the final line, but Guy Santos tonight ends up 9, 5 boards, 6 assists, and I think Guy had that maybe early in the third quarter tonight, and Austin says that's exactly what you could have done really well with Jonathan Kuminga a lot of nights doing that off the bench, but he didn't want to do that. And you're right about the motor. Guy's got a motor. Kuminga never had a motor. And I think, again, it got real petty with the thing that went viral that Slater mentioned about the frustration that was noted about people in Kuminga's camp, basically people that get, friends or family that get passes to be able to come to the game and be able to be in the player common area at times taking food. And basically after games, there's a massive spread by the locker room or in the locker room for home games. And guys will come by and, some nights it's catered by a restaurant. Some nights it's catered by the chefs that are on hand in the arena or whatever. And you can, make a plate, make a box. Guys will be walking out of the locker room, maybe if they're going to the bus with a big box of food. Sometimes it's like Chipotle or Chick-fil-A or something. You can grab 2 or 3 sandwiches if you want, and or a burrito and some chips or, whatever. And it was basically, the report was that people close to Kuminga were taking advantage of it. And I mean, you talk about petty. I mean, I'll say this, for that to kind of be leaked, I think I'm gonna and look, I've been on JK for that. I think that's a little lowbrow for that to get leaked. To be honest, like seriously. Andis says, Buddy said it was JD that took the food on IG. Yeah, again, that obviously Buddy having a good time with that, but I don't know, man. Like that to me was a little below board on the Warriors side to want, to if that was truly a frustration, I think that's kind of a bad look on the Warriors side, to be honest. But again, whatever is accepted in those particular situations, I think, when things are going bad, it's like any other situation in life. When things are going bad, you just start to nitpick every little part about somebody that you're in this bad relationship with until the point that it eventually fractures to a point of no return. One final piece here, and then we'll get into more of it. And again, great piece from Anthony Slater. And we talked about this when it went down. We went back to this when it went down, and it was the DNPs that came in the immediate aftermath of that heated meeting when the Warriors won in Cleveland and Chicago, and Kuminga was really bad in the Cleveland game. Really, Kuminga had not played well since the first 5 games of the season. He didn't play well after that. There was he was pulled from the starting lineup. He was pulled from the rotation, and then he was hurt, and then he came back, and then there was the faked injury question and the frustration that he was going to play in that game on January 2nd against Oklahoma City when everybody else rested. He basically quit on the team on November 11th when they pulled him from the rotation. And, there was frustration as to, Steve Kerr saying after they beat San Antonio the first time and Kuminga didn't play or played limited minutes, then didn't play the next game, that the Warriors found themselves. They looked like the team that look, I'm not going to make any mistake. We pointed it out on this show. Kerr did take some sneaky shots. Like Kerr did take some shots, and Turner, called them triggers, pokes. I know Kuminga was quoted as saying, that's the bleep I'm talking about. Like, why does he have to say stuff like that? There was the, quip that came from Steve to the media when asked about, Kuminga not getting minutes, and being taken from the rotation. Kerr had the legendary line where he said, "It happens to everybody unless you're an all-star," which again was a shot at Kuminga's high-end belief in what the player that he was versus what Steve Kerr believed him to be. Again, all of these ugly, ugly things that wound up being a different, leading up to the, it wound up being difference makers toward the ultimate end here. But again, I go back to the fact that this thing was cooked 2 to 3 years ago. And again, for those of you that have listened to me and followed me, I've been telling you, I mean, to me, this goes back to the Sacramento series in 2023 when this thing was steering toward a position of no return. So let's take a quick timeout. We'll come back. We're not going to do Sounds of Dubs OT tonight. It was kind of a light post game in the Warriors locker room. So we'll come back and we'll continue to reset the Slater piece. We'll also get into more in the YouTube chat. 808 KMBR if you want to weigh in on kind of our last installment of the Kuminga Chronicles, as the Warriors did lose tonight to the Spurs 126-113. It's Dubs OT with JD. We'll continue here on the Sports Leader.
Dub Nation, this is the real and inside story on Warriors basketball. Dubs OT with John Dickinson continues. Streaming live at twitch.tv/thesportsleader.
All right, welcome back. Final segment. Warriors lose 126-113. We're parsing through the Anthony Slater piece of ESPN on Jonathan Kuminga's exit. A lot of stuff we already knew in this, but my goodness, it was juicy. To be sure, on the relationship, some specifics between Kuminga and Steve Kerr. One nugget here, and Kyle, we'll get back into the YouTube chat here in just a second, but one other excerpt from what Anthony Slater wrote I thought was interesting, and we've talked about this. Kerr and Dunleavy would often cite lower efficiency numbers in isolation and in the mid-range, knowing that Kuminga obviously believed that he wanted to play in the mid-range and in isolation. They blamed Kuminga's agent, Slater writes, Aaron Turner, and those around Kuminga for prioritizing and working on, quote, the wrong things away from the facility. Where have we heard that one before? Routing his career down an incorrect path. The disconnect affected contract negotiations, and multiple members of the organization questioned whether it was more important for him to win or win his way, which is something that I've said for a long time, that Kuminga is not a winning player and never was a winning player. And honestly, being a focal point was more important to him than winning. And I think, that led to the whole, Kuminga on the Kings would be perfect for each other, because he would go there and not win and get a bunch of shots and be considered a star until everybody turned on him. But he'd get what he wants, which is the belief that he can be an all-star. But, yeah, the small jabs, we talked about that, about Kuminga believing he was a multi-time all-star. And then Steve Kerr saying, of course, that Kuminga, when asked about his lack of playing time, said that, hey, it happens to everybody getting pulled out of the rotation except for stars, which was a shot that infuriated Kuminga and obviously his camp and Aaron Turner. So we'll get a few more excerpts on that. Again, I think the most telling thing still is some of the stuff on management and the unwillingness to pivot off something that became pretty clear that it wasn't going to work. But I want to hear from you in the YouTube chat, your biggest takeaways if you read it or if you're hearing us kind of break it down here over the segment. Hey, Beerman, so Lacob should shoulder the blame for this debacle. All the years wasted because Joey Lightyears knows more than a lifetime of basketball people. Yeah, pretty brutal. But I think that's been kind of known. And if you've listened to even before the, for there to be a demand, there has to be demand. Even before that bar, I think it was pretty clear that Dunleavy and Kerr were in lockstep on Kuminga, but the unwillingness to be able to move him was basically a lot of Joe Lacob wanting to make sure that he would be able to net a certain level of return for Kuminga. And I go back to, again, when you look at Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, I would joke 2 years ago on this show, and I would get into it with fans who would say Anunoby and Siakam aren't good enough to trade. Kuminga's already as good as both those guys. People were saying that. And apparently, again, if you read between the lines, apparently Joe Lacob agreed that Pascal Siakam and Anunoby were not good enough of a return 2 years ago for Kuminga. It had to be somebody better. It had to be a star-type player. An all-star type player. And it was reported at a few different junctures that that the Warriors were only going to be looking for a star if they were going to move Kuminga. Otherwise, they believed that he could be that star. So, yes, a lot of this I definitely think falls at Joe Lacob's lap. All right, let's keep it rolling here in the chat. Ian J., the dysfunction between Kerr, Lacob, and the GM on this Kuminga thing is wild, no doubt. And again, I think the GM and the coach are in lockstep. I think, I know it was disputed that Kuminga was fully a Lacob pick, that there was a lot of indecision in the front office on exactly which way that the Warriors should ultimately go as far as Kuminga. I know Slater did address, the lottery picks and Franz Wagner, who went 8 to the Magic. And there was a group of coaches, Slater writes, on the staff who attended Wagner's workout and came away adamant he'd be an ideal choice in Kerr's system. Lacob and then general manager Bob Myers were among a select few who visited Kuminga in Miami 6 days before the draft. Then assistant coach Kenny Atkinson ran the workout and maintained strong belief in Kuminga through his final days with the organization. He left for the Cleveland Cavaliers head coaching job in 2024. So it sounds like Kenny Atkinson believed in Kuminga. It sounds like Bob Myers may have been, as the GM at the time, more in on Kuminga. Slater goes on some of the draft night when the Warriors were on the clock before the Miami workout. Both Kuminga and Wagner were on the board, and Lacob pushed for his preferred option. Team sources said Myers, Dunleavy, and then the assistant GM didn't object. Bob and I have felt for several years that we've needed physicality. Lacob said that night, athleticism and physicality. That's what really excites me about him. So, again, it isn't clear-cut. Hey, good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it, always. So it sounds like there was, it wasn't as clear-cut among the front office. And then Slater got into what we've talked about also with the Alex Caruso deal, as Lacob wanted. He had a difficult time sending Kuminga out in certain trades. Warriors talked to the Bulls about Caruso when it wasn't going to be maybe OG or it wasn't going to be Pascal Siakam, part of a bigger package. And Caruso was on the table. But Chicago was somebody that was interested in Kuminga at that point, with a source telling Slater that Joe gets outsized blame. There was a ton of indecision from several people on the willingness to be able to make that trade. Joe was cool trading him for Durant, obviously before Durant had ultimately nixed that deal, not wanting to come back to the Warriors. And then it got into everything that went down last summer with Aaron Turner finding the Kings and Suns as teams with interest in Kuminga. Kuminga was on a call, which had been reported, with Scott Perry and Doug Christie of Sacramento, but the Warriors didn't like any of the returns. Again, we've litigated that a ton. Malik Monk, Royce O'Neal, Grayson Allen, plus some draft capital. One of the common retorts, according to league sources, per Slater, Lacob would never agree to it. And then, again, Slater goes on to add, team sources said, believed Kuminga needed to be delivered a colder reality of the existing business dynamics. He was tired of being a pawn in an organizational tug-of-war. Coach won't play him. Management won't relinquish him, freezing his career, which, again, gets back to the issue with everything that went down in the summer. And, of course, Steve Kerr saying, hey, everybody liked him. I liked him. He's a good guy, personable, well-liked in the locker room, just a tough fit. But you can see the tough fit clearly outweighed. So that was a lot of the dysfunction. Again, a lot of this is stuff that's been reported on and we've discussed on this show. at a number of different points. But that's more detail from Slater on just kind of the breakdown of everything else. All right, let's get some more chats, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. Dom Peralta, we could see JK was not bought in for years. When Steph called him out in sack before Game 7, either get on the bus or walk. Yeah, that was a big one. And again, I think the first real notion that Kuminga was not going to work here was in that series where Kerr ended up completely pulling him out of the Warriors rotation. Next up from Dom, we go to Chris Cash. I've never seen Kobe not help on defense and not guard his man out of bounds on Christmas Day during a Christmas game. Big facts there, Chris. From Chris, we move to our buddy, Jokes on You. JD, that with a lottery pick, Kerr wasn't involved. JD, that with a lottery pick, Kerr wasn't involved. Help me out on that one, Kyle.
Yeah, just like what stood out from the ESPN article. Yeah, like Kerr actually wasn't that involved as one would think with the decision to make.
Other than wanting Wagner once they went and they worked out, once they went and they had the Wagner workout. But yes, ultimately Lacob, Dunleavy, and Bob Myers at that point being the guys that basically had the say. Even though I think Kerr had his input, but you're right, not as much input as maybe you would think that the head coach would. And look, Steve's addressed the fact that he actually thinks it's good for the front office to have some autonomy in the belief to pick who they want. But this is such a unique situation with Steph and the system that had won, so many games and so many playoff games for so long through the years that, maybe Steve should have been a little bit more involved than he ultimately was. All right, let's do a few more here, and then we'll finish everything up for this Wednesday night. KM Johnson, trade deadline may have passed, but there are definitely more trades to come with this team. Yeah, they're going to have to make some moves in the offseason. I don't think there's much doubt about it. Thanks for the chime in. Max Lopez, whiffing on picks is the side failure. The real failure was not flipping those picks for existing pros and role players. Yeah, the Warriors could have been in the conversation, I think, for another title in multiple years. I think last year would have been one. I think the 23-year, ironically enough, could have been another, although maybe the Draymond punch winds up completely negating it in that year. But they didn't do it, and now they're at a point where they still have all this draft capital, but everybody's getting a little bit older, and I think the fit, not in terms of basketball stature, but the fit in terms of salary matching and how many picks you're giving up for what, I do think, nobody's saying you got to give up the farm. Nobody's saying you got to give up 4 picks plus a swap. But, again, I think the best path forward, we can relitigate the past all you want, and I think it's fair to get into all of it, and we have done it and we'll continue to do it here on the Sports Leader. But the truth is that the Warriors' best path forward now is hoping Porzingis can be somebody worth re-signing because he can actually really help. Hoping you can keep Melton. You get Horford back. You get Jimmy back in January or February, but you use, I would say, 2 to 3 of your picks. I would say 2, including this year's. And I kind of, I kind of feel like this year's is a throwaway in some ways, but you use this year's pick plus maybe 2 more, 28 and 30. Nobody's saying 32. And you try to get the best freaking player you can, and you drop that player in with Porzingis. You drop that player in with Melton. You drop that player in with a healthy Jimmy, and then maybe you can get back to where you were last year, or maybe a cut above where you were last year. Going into a true last dance kind of scenario with Steph at the helm. All right, let's get a couple of more. Was Kuminga's friends taking pizza home or taking the good stuff like shrimp? Sorry, that was an accidental click on my part. I accidentally, hit a keystroke there. Andis, I think it was, come on, Joe, don't be stingy. Andis, I think you're right. That was my first thought, was like, come on, like, don't be stingy. Honestly, it depends on the night, Andis. There will be nights on the road, just kind of full disclosure, there will be nights where obviously there's a catered meal on the road that basically be in the hallway by the locker room in most arenas. And so as guys are coming in, if they want to shower, grab some food, eat in the locker room, they can. If they want to grab some food, eat, then shower, get dressed, they can before they walk out of the arena and go to the team bus. And what eventually happens is there's always, usually, Andis, it's funny since this came up, usually there's so much more food that the entire locker room will be cleaned out, the entire traveling party will be gone. And what will ultimately happen is somebody from the team will say to like reporters that are kind of waiting, like, hey, if you want to make a box, go for it. Like maybe the 4 or 5 traveling reporters, like after everybody's gone, it's like, yeah, if you want to, you can. So it isn't exactly, and it varies to your point, it varies home away and kind of where the team is as to what it, what the catering of it, what the extent of the catering. So some nights it is good stuff like that. And some nights it might be, pizzas and a burrito bar, or make your own fajitas or sandwiches or, something like that. It kind of depends on the night. Max Lopez, the source, a hungry Cannon Curry. That's funny. That's pretty good. All right, let's get one more here, and that, of course, will be our comment of the night.
Now, time for the Dubs OT comment of the night.
Clem Ackers, JD, has someone ever complained about you getting too much media food? LOL. Petty as hell. That's a great – Clem, I thought the same thing, man. And you're right. Like the media, there's media dining, and we were talking about it. You can get a little soft serve. You can – I mean, I will say, I'm not going to name names, but there are people that'll eat their meal and then grab a box and grab a to-go tray and box it up and take a little something. But no, nobody has ever. I'll be honest, Clem. Sometimes at the Niners, they got a bunch of snacks. Well, I might take a couple bags of chips, or I might take a couple things of beef jerky. If they got some beef jerky, I might take I might take an extra bottle of water, Clem. But no, nobody's ever complained that I've taken a beef stick or a bag of or a bag of jalapeno kettle chips. EB here. JD went to get some food. Yeah. The team said, reporters, come in and grab some food by the Sacramento dungeon. And but JK already took it. No, but really, usually it usually is kind of in the hallway by the Sacramento dungeon to use the King's arena as an example. But yeah, usually there's a hallway kind of by the locker room in the restricted like player family, traveling party type area. And if it's ever gone, Billy Joe from Alamo's like, was he walking out with a whole turkey? Like, what was going on here? Yeah, or a big ham? Like, no, it's not to that level. But yeah, no, I've never been. Yeah. By the way, I had fixed skew today for the first time, and it was awesome. Right next to Harmonic here in Thrive City, the Indonesian barbecue fusion. It was awesome. I had the brisket, Kyle. It was tremendous. I met Fick, and from Fix Q, and he's a leader head. He's a JD head, and it was great to be there. And I had the brisket. I had this mac and cheese side dish, and I had a coleslaw dish that was to die for. So if you're ever out in the area, Harmonic can have a brew and Fix Q here in Thrive City, and they've got a spot in Oakland as well that is just tremendous. All right, that's going to do it for us tonight. Good stuff, Kyle. I appreciate you, my man. I saw Jordan Pertari running around there helping to cut a lot of the audio tonight. Who else? Am I forgetting anybody else? Did we get a Kyle Chung tonight? We had an Overnight Dave.
Man, I wish.
Kind of lurking there. No, they might have won if Kyle Chung had bothered to show up.
Can I share this one quote from the Slater article that stood out?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Everybody was right. Everybody was wrong. Everyone's to blame. Nobody won.
Nobody won. That is absolutely true. That is a great way to end it tonight here from Harmonic in Thrive City. Big thanks to everybody. Big thanks to Billy Joe and Alamo. Billy Joe wanted me to give a nod to the losing to the Spurs. No slouch losing to the Spurs, who went 4-1 against OKC. And Billy Joe also says, if you didn't hear it, the Kings did lose their 14th in a row. They're lighting the gym beam tonight, says Billy Joe. That's a good line, but bum. That's a good line, Billy Joe. I'll let you thank you, sir, for that. All right, so for Kyle and for Jordan and for Overnight Dave, we will be back. I'm taking a few days off over the holiday break, so I'll be back with you 2 to 6 from Harmonic a week from tomorrow. Copes and Depop are out. We're going to be doing the afternoon show. Larry Kruger is going to join me for the afternoon show out here at Harmonic in Thrive City from 2 to 6, and then I'll have Dubs OT from 9:30 to 11, right when the game goes final. Warriors and the Celtics. Hope for a Steph return. Should be the debut of Kristaps Porzingis, and we'll be here for you as we are after each and every Dubs game the remainder of the season. We'll talk to you soon, right here on the Sports Leader. John Dickinson.
No, God! No, God, please, no!